Today, 2025, okay, we see some of the stuff that's happened the last 5 years. Yeah, LGBTQ, totally fine. Hey, school, kids, transgender, totally fine. Hey, totally fine. Everything is like totally fine. Comparing today to when you read about the city of Corinth and how immoral it was, and you see many times a comparison being made of Corinth with the modern day Las Vegas or whatever, some of these other cities that we have in America. And of course, you don't know the definite question, and when I make this comparison, I'm just curious to know what you're going to be saying about this. What caused Jesus to, what was the level of immorality where God said, hey, man, we got to go handle this right now? And then he comes down and, wait a minute. Or is the world today at that level of immorality where God's sitting up there saying, I think it's time? So how do you compare today's times to biblical times, Corinth, that era?
Oh, I think the time period that we live in is much more emblematic of the early church in those first few centuries of its existence, in that you have a culture that was very much accepting of, say, promiscuous sexual ethics and idolatry, and was open to things and misrepresented and misunderstood Christianity fundamentally. In that, there was a common practice within ancient Rome called exposure, where if you had a baby and you didn't want it, you would put it outside the city gates. You would put it in the garbage dumps. And Christians were notorious for going and saving these babies. And so the Christian movement actually grew in part because they were against this form of abortion in the ancient world. And so they would collect these babies and they would raise them. And a lot of these babies were girls, which actually meant that the early Christian movements became astatistically predominantly women, because a lot of these women, the little girls, were exposed in this. Now, the society around them heard about these strange Christians who were talking about, with the Lord's Supper, drinking blood and eating flesh, and then they knew that they were going out and they were taking these babies from the garbage dumps. And so they started to develop rumors that Christians were cannibals. And yet, despite what is a pretty heinous accusation, complete misunderstanding of what's going on, Christianity still grew. And some of the earliest critics of Christianity referred to Christianity as the religion of slaves and women, because it gave agency to these groups that were marginalized within society.
It's so funny. The mob's been around always, and it confuses and gaslights people all the time.
Definitely. And Christians were accused of being atheists, A being the negative participle, and then theos meaning God, because they denied that the gods existed, and antisocial, because they wouldn't participate in the goings-on within society that were inherently religious. And so it's in this context that Christianity, grassroots, from the bottom up, eventually goes from 11 scared disciples hiding in an upper room when Jesus is crucified to fundamentally taking over the Roman world within, half a millennium. And it's because of the faithful witness of the Christians who were being persecuted and yet were still proclaiming Jesus as Lord, and were fundamentally speaking into the society that they lived in with a message that overturned the norms, because it gave people purpose. And ultimately, it gave them truth. That the idea of God stepping out of eternity changes the paradigm. I mentioned Glenn Scrivener. He has this really good illustration where he talks about all worldviews are some version of survival of the fittest. I'm paraphrasing him here, but what he says is all worldviews are some version of survival of the fittest, in that you need to do right, you need to think right, or you need to feel right. And Christianity is different in that the fittest steps down and sacrifices himself for the survival of the weakest. And that message, we're just over the Christmas season, right? The Christmas message of God becoming a baby and becoming vulnerable is both an example to us of humility and how we should live, but ultimately in worlds where might and power in a very abusive way are often seen as the way to go, Christianity subverts that, in that Jesus could have taken cues from, all the rulers of his day of of Caesar and of Herod, and later on during his earthly ministry of Pilate, right? He doesn't do that. He comes down, he humbles himself, he lives a life of a servant, and he gets murdered. And that changes the narrative. And then he rises from the dead and conquers sin and death. And so because of that, those 11 scared disciples are now willing to go out into the world and suffer persecution and beating and death for the sake of this message that ultimately spreads out through all the ancient world and gets us to where we are today, where we're talking about things like freedom.
Yeah.
And that's because of the Christian Revolution.
Nowadays, more than ever, the brand you wear reflects and represents who you are. So for us, if you wear a Future Looks Bright hat or a Valuetainment gear, you're telling the world, I'm optimistic. I'm excited about what's going to be happening, but you're a free thinker. You question things. You like debate. And by the way, last year, 120,000 people got a piece of Future Looks Bright gear with Valuetainment. We have so many new things. The cufflinks are here. New Future Looks Bright. This is my favorite, the green one. Just yesterday, somebody placed an order for 100 of these. If you watch the PBD podcast, you got a bunch to choose from. White ones, black ones. If you smoke cigars and you come to our cigar lounge, we have this high quality lighter cutter and a holder for the cigars. We got sweaters with the Valuetainment logo on it. We got mugs. We got a bunch of different things. But if you believe the future looks bright, if you follow our content and what we represent with Valuetainment, with PBD Podcast, go to vtmerch.com. And by the way, if you order right now, there's going to be a special VT gift inside just for you. So again, go to vtmerch.com, place your order, tell the world that you believe the future looks bright. If you enjoyed this video, you want to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click here.